first going to look at the idea of rhythm. Now, yesterday we looked at sentence stress, the difference between lexical stress and sentence stress. In order to define the rhythm of English, we really need to concentrate not on lexical stress, but on sentence stress. And we need a basic unit of rhythm. Now, the basic unit of rhythm is usually called the foot. The structure of the foot in English can be viewed in a number of different ways. I'm going to take a very simple view of it for the time being. And the structure of the foot in English consists of a sentence stress syllable, and that is obligatory, more or less. We'll come to see cases where it isn't so obligatory later on. Followed by a number of unstressed syllables. There don't have to be any unstressed syllables in the foot, so the lower limit of the number of unstressed syllables is 0. I don't know that there is any theoretical upper limit, so we'll have to put a question mark for that. I suppose that most feet have 1 or 2, maximum of about 5, I would think, but that's not a theoretical maximum. So that's the structure of the foot. A stressed syllable, sentence stressed syllable, not a lexically stressed syllable, followed by some unstressed syllables, maybe 0, maybe 1, 2, 3. Now, I've given you some examples on the first page of your handout of some sentences, some utterances divided into feet. So if you look at example A on your handout, everybody found that? John is coming on Saturday. The way I have the sentence stress pattern of that, I've got a sentence stress on John, that's what I'm using that mark for, and come on and sat. So I've got 3 feet, and the 3 feet in that, actually I've only got 2. I've got 3 feet in the sentence, and the first one is Johnny's, the second is coming on, and the third one is Saturday. In B, you can see that I've marked 4 syllables as being sentence stressed. That's the way I want to say this sentence. So I've got 4 feet. The first one is how. That has a sentence stress syllable. It doesn't have any unstressed syllables following it. Did she re is the next foot. Member hisa is the next foot. And dress is the final foot. So in that, I've got 4 feet. C, the same sentence, but with a different stress pattern, a different sentence stress pattern now, so a different rhythm. I've only got 3 sentence stress syllables in C, how, mem, and dress. So the first foot is, how did she read? Second foot is, member hisa, and the final foot is dress. So let me say those sentences for you, see how they sound. A is, John is coming on Saturday. B is, how did she remember his address? Are there any spare handouts anywhere, please? Are there any spare ones? You've got them. Okay. B, I'll do again. How did she remember his address? And C is, how did she remember his address? So you can hear the difference in rhythm between B and C, even though it's the same sentence. The first one goes, how did she remember his address? And the second one, how did she remember his address? Okay, now, the important thing about the foot in English is that feet tend to last the same amount of time as other feet in the utterance, no matter how many syllables there are in them. So if you've got a foot with 1 syllable, and the next foot has got 4 syllables in it, in order for the 1-foot syllable to take up the same amount of time, more or less, as the 4-syllable foot, then you have to squash the time allowed for each syllable, compress the time allowed for each syllable, in order to fit those 4 syllables into more or less the same time as the 1 syllable. Okay? That is called the principle of isochronicity, which is a nice word. So feet in English tend to be isochronous. If you actually go and measure them carefully, then you'll find that they're not exactly the same amount of time, but they sound as though they are. Okay, so there is certainly some compression of syllables. So it is not the case that a 1-syllable foot is a quarter of the length of a 4-syllable foot. There is compression of the time for that for each syllable in that 4-syllable foot to make it more like the duration for the 1-syllable foot. Let's have a little example of this. D, I've got Mary had a little lamb with 4 feet in it. So, lambs do have 4 feet, don't they? Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little lamb. Concentrate on Mary. Got 2 syllables in that foot, yes? Mary had a little lamb. Now, I'm going to say the sentence again, but I'm going to change the name from Mary to something else. And it's going to have 3 syllables in it. So I've got to say those 3 syllables quicker to fit them into the same time as I had for the 2 syllables of Mary. So, Mary had a little lamb. Algernon had a little lamb. Da-da-da. Oh, Mary had... Algernon had... So, the 3 syllables of Algernon are a bit quicker. Another example, if you concentrate on the last foot now, in my first example, I had 1 syllable, lamb. I've got a lot of time to say that. If I put more syllables in that, then I'm going to have to speed up at the end. So, Mary had a little lamb. Mary had a little alligator. Da-da-da-da. Okay? So those 4 syllables... Funny person, Mary. So is Algernon, actually. We have to squash the time amount, for those 4 syllables quite considerably to fit them into more or less the same time as I took for lamb in the other utterance. Now, of course, one can speed up generally and slow down generally, so I can talk very quickly or I can slow down and talk rather slowly. So I can talk at a different tempo. But when I speed up, I tend to speed up all of the feet. When I slow down, I tend to slow down all of the feet, okay? So it's not got anything to do with speed as such, but something to do with the relative speeds of different syllables. Okay? Now, other languages don't do this. Other languages tend, for example, to give the same amount of time for each syllable. One good example of a language like this is French. Okay, so have we got any French speakers here? Right. I'm going to try and imitate a French accent. Please don't be insulted. Okay? If I say, Mary had a little lamb, in my normal English accent, Mary had a little lamb. And then I say the same sentence in a sort of French accent, it will sound rather like this. Mary had a little lamb, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, instead of da-da-da-da-da-da-da, okay? Each syllable more or less the same amount of time. Mary had a little lamb. Okay, so that's the principle of isochronicity. There's one slight complication. Sometimes you find utterances that don't begin with a stressed syllable. All of the utterances that I should go and bang that man on the head. All of the utterances that I've used so far, the first syllable bore a sentence stress. However, it's possible to find utterances where the first syllable is not sentence stressed. What happens then is we've got a sort of defective foot. Okay, we've got a foot which hasn't got a sentence stress syllable in it. It's just got some unstressed syllables at the beginning of the utterance. We've got an example of G on your handout, example of G. You can see that I've got sentence stressed syllables marked on seen, brel, and n. But the first two syllables are unstressed. So the 3 full feet that I've got in this sentence are seen my umbrella anywhere. The first two don't have the first two syllables don't have a sentence stress syllable preceding them. Those 2 syllables are an example of what is called an anachrosis, which is another nice word. And the thing about anacroses is that they tend to be uttered very rapidly so that you don't disturb the rhythm too much. And in fact, very many of the things like elisions of consonants and stuff like and compressions of syllables take place in anacroses to make them even shorter. So if I say that sentence, it will go something like, if you see my umbrella, if you see my umbrella anywhere, if you see my umbrella anywhere, I can make the anachrosis even shorter. I can get rid of the first vowel and say, if you see my, we like to get over these anacroses as quickly as we possibly can. So that's a little bit about the rhythm. Now, this next point is not on your handout. Somebody yesterday asked me about photographic memory. Yes? This is where I ought to say something more about that. English likes, insofar as it is possible, not to have sentence stress syllables coming together next to each other. Okay? We like to have an alternation. Most languages, in fact, like to have an alternation between stressed and unstressed syllables, strong syllables and weak syllables. Which is why, if you take this example that I gave you yesterday, we're more likely to say it like that, big bad wolf, than to have 3 sentence stress syllables come together. Now, the question that I was asked yesterday is, why do we move the stress in photographic memory, when if you look at it carefully, there's a sentence stress, probably. There's a sentence stress, but there's this syllable in between them. So these 2 sentence stress syllables are not next to each other. But we still tend to move that from there to there. Now, we tend to do this, stress shift. And instead of saying photographic memory, we say photographic memory. The explanation for this is reasonably complicated. I'm going to simplify it. Okay? First, each syllable has got to have a little bit of time to it. Okay? So we'll represent this little bit of time with a star. So we'll give each syllable a star. We might have 2 or 3 syllables in that word. It might be memory, or it might even be memory. Okay? Now, one of the ways in which we make syllables stressed is to give them more time than other syllables. So, the stressed syllables we will give another star to. So, that has got 2 stars, that However, if you notice, this syllable also is rather rhythmically strong, if I say the word in isolation. It's not photographic, but photographic. So that needs an extra star too. But that is stronger than that, so that needs an extra star too. Where will we stop? This is about as strong as that, so we'll give that an extra star too. Now, that's a representation of the stress pattern or the rhythm pattern of that phrase called a metrical grid. And it contains, the way I've got it, what is known as a stress clash. And the stress clash is there. The stress clash is, it's a stress clash because we've got two levels of stars next to one another, two levels, 1, 2, without any intervening star here, all right? And that is really what English doesn't like. So what do? Well, we've got to do something. We've got to move one of these stars. Other things being equal, it's the first star we will move. Where can we move it to? We can only move it to the same level. We can't take it down the level. Can't demote stars. So the only place we've got it to shift it to is there, which is why we end up with the main stress in the word photographic in this phrase here, photographic memory. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, and I think I'll have time, occasion to say more about it some other time. It's this stress shift phenomenon is in some cases optional. You don't have to do it. But when you listen to lots of English conversation, you hear it happening a lot, and sometimes you hear it happening when you really shouldn't have, according to this theory. So that's not the whole story, but the important thing is to remember this stress clash here. Two levels of prominence, forget that circle again, two levels of prominence here, which have nothing intervening in between them. Okay. Once we've done it, of course, once we've done this stress shift, then we've got exactly what we want. We've shifted the star across there. We've got nothing clashing on this level, so that's not a clash. We've got a space on that level, but the level below has got a star on it, so there are not two levels, and similarly here. Okay, so we've satisfied what is called the principle of rhythmic alternation. Right, stress clash, that is. Stress shift. Okay, that was about rhythm. Now I'm going to, before I go on to talk more about intonation, are there any questions about what I've said so far? Right, good. The basic unit of intonation, I haven't defined for you, haven't given it a proper name yet. Yesterday I kept talking about complete intonation patterns. There are lots of different names that people give for units of intonation. The name that gets used in this department mostly is the name Wordgroup. So, if we have a look at the second side, no, not the second side, just a minute. Hang on, I'll give you an example. we have a look at the second utterance here. This thing keeps frightening me. Move it slightly before I sit on it. John's friend's uncle's raincoat isn't here. These lines, vertical lines, represent the boundaries of word groups. Can you all see that? So, the way I've got this marked, isn't here is a word group, and John's friend's uncle's raincoat is a word group. Right. We'll first start thinking about the internal structure of a word group, what you can find inside word groups, and then we will start worrying about where the boundaries of word groups can come, what sort of choices we can make as to where to put word group boundaries. Now we saw yesterday, or I told you yesterday, that a complete intonation pattern, a word group, must have at least one accented syllable in it. There must be one sentence stress syllable which has got a pitch feature attached to it which makes it accented. That obligatory part of the word group is called the nucleus. So the first thing that we can say about the word group is that each word group must have a nucleus. And, moreover, each word group has one nucleus, and that one nucleus is the last accented syllable. So we've got a nucleus, and we can have word groups that consist just of a nucleus and nothing else. For example, no is a word group which consists of just one syllable, which is a nucleus and has got nothing else before it or after it. However, we can find word groups where there are syllables following the nucleus. Now these syllables can be stressed or unstressed, but they cannot be accented because the definition of the nucleus is that it is the last accented syllable in the word group. These syllables which follow the nucleus, if they're there, are called the tail. And we'll put the optional, the non-obligatory components of the word group in brackets. Okay? So, no doesn't have a tail, but no, you idiot, does have a tail. Okay? And no, you silly idiot, has an even longer tail. And no, you absolute, complete and utter fool of an idiot, has an even longer tail. Now, the tail syllables can be stressed or unstressed, but they can't be accented. If there is more than one accented syllable in a word group, then the final one, of course, is the nucleus, and the first one has got a special name too. It's called the onset. Now, of course, not all word groups have an onset because not all word groups have more than one accented syllable. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 17 accented syllables in your word group, then the first one is called the onset, the last one is called the nucleus. So, for example, if I extend my example of no, and no, you idiot. If I put another accented syllable before it, something like, I told you no, you idiot, where told is accented, told will be the onset. I told you no, you idiot. The bit from the onset up until the nucleus, but not including the nucleus, so finishing at the syllable before the nucleus, is another component of the word group called the head. You don't have to have a head, it's not obligatory, so we'll put it in brackets. You may find that there are syllables in front of the nucleus, but none of them are accented. all of the syllables in front of the nucleus may be stressed or unstressed, but they're not accented. So if we have some unaccented syllables at the beginning of a word group, those are called the prehead. Okay. Again, you don't have to have a prehead in a word group, so you'll put that in brackets. So that is a structure of, sort of schematic structure of a word group in terms of the intonation components that can occur in it. Let me say a little bit more about these two components before I give you some examples. Prehead is a very silly term, I think, because it looks as though it should mean something that comes before the head. But you can have a prehead without having a head, right? I defined prehead very carefully for you. I said any unaccented syllables at the beginning of a word group, any unaccented syllables before the first accented syllable. Now, of course, the first accented syllable could be the nucleus, all right? So if there is no head, you can still have some unaccented syllables before the nucleus, and that will still be a prehead. So you can have prehead head, or prehead nucleus, or head nucleus, or if you want prehead head, okay. So there are no restrictions on what can occur with what at all. You can have a prehead without a head, you can have a head without a prehead, you can have both, or you can have neither. Let's have a look at some examples. If you turn over, look at the second page of your handout. Example H. The sentence is, she didn't want to pay for it. Pay for the book, I'm sorry. I hope you can see this. You've got it on your handout anyway. So I've got an interlinear graph representation of the intonation of this utterance. You can see that I've chosen to make did sentence stressed, want sentence stressed, pay sentence stressed, and book sentence stressed. However, the first accented syllable that I have is want. Why is it accented? 1, it's sentence stressed. 2, there's a change in pitch between what goes before it and it itself. It starts a new trend in the pitch contour, therefore it's accented. Therefore, want in this utterance is the onset. Pay is the nucleus, that's the last accented syllable. So what have I got here? I've got she didn't, here is the prehead. Want to is the head, pay is the nucleus, and for the book is the tail. Okay, so I'll say that sentence for you as it's indicated there. She didn't want to pay for the book. She didn't want to pay for the book. Okay, now if we have a look at another version of the same sentence where the intonation and things are different, here what I've got, the same sentence, I think I've got the same stress pattern as well. So did, want, pay, and book are all sentence stress syllables. However, and the prehead is the same as before. Okay. However, the last accented syllable this time is book. That's the nucleus. So everything between want up until the is the head this time. And just to show you that you can have more than 2 accents in a word group, I've made pay accented as well by making the pitch contour step down there. So I've got 3 accented syllables: want, the onset, book, the nucleus, and pay. It hasn't got a special name, it's just an accent in the head. So prehead is she didn't. Want to pay for that is the head this time, and book is the nucleus. I'll say that sentence for you. The way I've got it represented there is she didn't want to pay for the book. She didn't want to pay for the book. Okay, we'll have a look at a couple more examples quickly. Here, J. I've only got one accented syllable this time, and that is the syllable want. So I haven't got an onset. If I haven't got an onset, I can't have a head. So she didn't want is a prehead, want is the nucleus, and to pay for the book is the tail. So that would sound like this. She didn't want to pay for the book. She didn't want to pay for the book. And this is a slightly more complicated one. I've got a number of accented syllables here. She is accented. It starts this descending trend in the pitch contour. Want is accented because it doesn't do the same as all the syllables coming before it. It goes up and then starts coming down again. Pay is accented because it does the same thing. It jumps up and then starts coming down again. And book is the nucleus. So I've got 4 accented syllables. There are no syllables in front of the first accented syllable, so I don't have a prehead. She didn't want to pay for the is the head, and book is the nucleus. And you'll notice that the pitch contour on the nucleus is different from all the others. It goes down and then comes up again. That would sound like this. She didn't want to pay for the book. She didn't want to pay for the book. So, head and nucleus. So those constituents of the intonation pattern, it's quite important you understand what they are, because in the rest of the course there will be lots of references to things like prehead, head, nucleus, tail, accent, things like that. So that's the internal structure of intonation pattern, word group. Now we will start worrying about how word groups are associated with utterances, how you can divide utterances into different numbers of word groups, what tendencies there are in English, or some of the tendencies that there are in English, for the placing of boundaries in utterances. The first thing to notice is that the number of word groups that you produce when you produce a particular bit of speech is not fixed. You can choose how many word groups to put there. Give you an example of this. If you look at the third page of your handout, where there are 3 examples of the sentence didn't want to tell him, I didn't want to tell him about it. That's examples L, M, and N. Have you found that? Now, first we have to look for things which can be interpreted as a nucleus. Now, I haven't told you about these things yet, so you'll have to believe me. Okay? I'll tell you about them, I think, on Thursday. If we look at the pitch contour of L, there is only one pitch configuration in that which can be interpreted as a nucleus, and that is the one on beginning at tell. The fact that tell falls and then everything after it levels out at a low level means that tell will be recognized by a native English speaker, if they know anything about it, as a nucleus. Okay? Don't go and ask the next person you see in the street what a nucleus is. They think you're crazy. Okay, but if you happen to be talking to an intonation analyst, they will tell you that tell must be a nucleus. And there are only one of those things in utterance L. So we have to conclude that utterance L consists of one word group only. If we have a look at that possibility, we can see that I is going to be the prehead, didn't want to is going to be the head, tell the nucleus, and him about it, the tail. Okay? And it would sound like this. I didn't want to tell him about it. I didn't want to tell him about it. Now, if we look at utterance M, there are two pitch configurations there which could be recognized as nuclear. The first one is the low rising pitch configuration on want, and the second one is again the low falling, leveling out pitch configuration beginning at tell. So we will have to conclude that that utterance consists of two word groups. The first one, the boundary between them, rather, is between want and two. So the word group boundary, there is a word group boundary between want and two. The first word group, I didn't want, consists of a prehead, I, didn't, head, want, nucleus, no tail. The second word group consists of prehead, two, nucleus, tell, tail, him about it. That will sound like this. I didn't want to tell him about it. Not quite right, I'll do it again. I didn't want to tell him about it. The two word groups. Now, the word group boundary after want can be accompanied by a pause if I want it to be. Okay? I can say, I didn't want to tell him about it. Okay, with a little pause. That was rather a long pause, but never mind. But I don't have to pause there if I don't want to. I didn't want to tell him about it. Would still be two word groups. Why? Because I've got two nuclei. N is different from both L and M. N has, again, two configurations which can be recognized as a nucleus. The second one is the same, the low falling, leveling out pattern on tell, beginning of tell. The first one is the falling, rising pattern beginning on did. So I've got two word groups in this utterance as well. The first one is I didn't, which consists of I, a prehead, and did the nucleus, and the tail. The second one consists of a head, want to, nucleus, tell, and tail again, him about it. That will sound like this. I didn't want to tell him about it. I didn't want to tell him about it. Now, using the terms that I was telling you about yesterday, L differs from M in tonality. L differs from N in tonality. M and N differ in tonality. So tonality, the choice which we call tonality, the intonational choice which we call tonality, really is the speaker's choice as to how many word group boundaries there are going to be in an utterance and where they are. Okay? Next question is, given an utterance, can you put word group boundaries anywhere you like? And the answer is no. For example, if I take this sentence, my father is arriving on Tuesday, I can say that just as one word group containing one nucleus if I want, so I can put a word group boundary at the beginning and I can put a word group boundary at the end and say it like this. My father is arriving on Tuesday. Now, I can do more than that if I want. For example, I could put a word group boundary there and say, instead of, my father is arriving on Tuesday, which is only one word group, I could say, my father is arriving on Tuesday. Okay, two word groups with a boundary between father and is. I could get rid of that one if I wanted and put one there instead. My father is arriving on Tuesday. Okay, that sounds all right. I could put both of them in if I wanted. My father is arriving on Tuesday. However, there are some places where it is very unlikely that I would put word group boundaries. Let's have a different colour. For example, this is an extremely unlikely place for a word group boundary. If I put one there and nowhere else, then I would say something like, my father is arriving on Tuesday. Sounds very odd. Another place which is very unlikely that I'm going to put the word group boundary is there. My father is arriving on Tuesday. Ah, just a minute. Just a minute. I could say that, couldn't I? My, meaning, my goodness. Or, wow, or help, or something. Father is arriving on Tuesday. I'd forgotten. But notice that if we do put a word group boundary there, what we force the hearer to do is to reanalyze the syntax of the grammar of the sentence. Now, with a word group boundary here, it is no longer a noun phrase with a head noun preceded by some sort of determiner or whatever you want to call my, but two different phrases, my, an interjection, and father, a noun phrase. Now that proves something. If you've got a word group boundary somewhere, it has to coincide with some important syntactic boundary. Yeah? Now, there's no important syntactic boundary between on and choose. Okay? That's all one phrase. Okay? There's no real division there, syntactic division. So that's why we can't put a word group boundary there. If we do put a word group boundary here between my and father, then what we are signalling is that there is a syntactic boundary there, when first we didn't think there was. Okay. So word group boundaries coincide with syntactic boundaries, but not syntactic boundaries of any particular sort, just syntactic boundaries. So word group boundaries do not coincide all the time with sentence boundaries, or with noun phrase boundaries, or with verb phrase boundaries, but just with boundaries. Okay. However, there are some tendencies in English for the placement of word group boundaries. If we have a simple sentence which consists of a subject and object, a subject, a verb and an object, or subject, a verb and some sort of complement, adverbial complement, and none of those components are very long or complicated, then the likelihood is that the sentence will be one word group. Okay? So a very simple sentence like that, John isn't here. Okay, one word group. I could split it into two word groups if I wanted to, but it's a little less likely. However, if I make one of the components of that sentence, say the noun, phrase, subject, which is John, more complicated, longer, by adding words to it, then the likelihood is that I will split that long, complicated component off from the rest of the sentence and give it a word group of its own. So, if we go back to that sentence, where now the noun, phrase, subject of the sentence is John's friend's uncle's raincoat rather than John, it's more likely that I will have two word groups. So John isn't here with one word group, but more likely something like John's friend's uncle's raincoat isn't here. Okay. Here's another fairly simple sentence which consists of a noun phrase subject, I, a verb phrase open the door slowly. The door is a noun phrase object, and slowly is an adverbial phrase. I open the door slowly. If I make that adverbial phrase more complicated, longer, by adding words to it, changing it around a bit, then it's likely that I'm going to split that off and give it a separate word group of its own. So in that sentence, I open the door in a slow and careful way as possible. It's likely to have a separate word group of its own. Not guaranteed, but likely. And here's another example. I gave the book to Mary. Fairly simple sentence. Noun phrase subject, I. Verb phrase gave the book to Mary. The book is a noun phrase object, and to Mary is... Anybody better than the syntax than me? What's to Mary? It's another noun phrase, prepositional phrase, shall we say. That's fairly simple structure. I gave the book to Mary. If I make to Mary more complicated by making it longer and having more words in it, then we might come up with something like this. I gave the book to the girl with the green dress and long red hair. Okay? It's more likely that I will have two word groups in that and split the complicated bit off from the rest. Excuse me. Now, apart from those general principles of simple structures tending to have one word group, some component of the structure gets more complicated, then that will probably have a word group of its own. There are some tendencies in English for word group boundary placement which may be different from the tendencies in your languages. For example, if we have a sentence which contains a vocative. A vocative is a word which directly addresses the speaker that you're talking to. So words like sir, madam, Fred. Final vocatives in English, what I mean by final vocatives is vocatives that come at the end of what you're saying to the person, tend not to have a word group boundary of their own. There tends not to be a word group boundary between the vocative and what you're saying to that person. So that sentence, very unlikely that an native English speaker would put a word group boundary between me and sir. Much more likely to say, would you mind coming with me, sir? And similarly, how are you, Fred? Not, how are you, Fred? Okay, which would be two word groups. However, if you put the vocative at the beginning, then you sometimes do, sometimes don't have a separate word group for it. So it's possible to have a separate word group in that because the vocative is before the rest of the sentence. And you can say, Mary, I want to talk to you. You could say, Mary, I want to talk to you. With only one word group, you have a choice there. Another fairly strong tendency in English, it concerns what we might call reporting phrases. Phrases like he said, she answered, they screamed, or whatever. Where you have a bit of reported speech and a reporting phrase. Now, reporting phrases, if they're final, tend, again, to be part of the same word group as what went before. So not to be split off from the rest of the utterance by putting a word group boundary there. So, wait for us, they shouted. Not, wait for us, they shouted. Yeah? That would be two word groups, but much more likely with one word group. And, I'm very sorry, said the teacher. Not, I'm very sorry, said the teacher. initial reporting phrases, however, again, you've got a choice. I could say that sentence, she answered, I don't care, as one word group, or she answered, I don't care, as two word groups. So that word group boundary there in the middle is optional. You don't have to have it, but you can have it. Another tendency in English for word group boundary placement concerns appositional phrases. When you've got two phrases which refer to the same thing, have the same grammatical function in the sentence, if that is the case, they tend to be divided from one another by placing a word group boundary between them. So, for example, that if I have a sister and she happens to be called Janet, I might introduce you to her like that. This is my sister, Janet. My sister and Janet are the same person, and in that sentence, my sister and Janet are fulfilling the same syntactic function. Here's another example. I've just seen Joe Bloggs, the famous footballer. Joe Bloggs and the famous footballer are the same person. They're fulfilling the same syntactic function. They are in apposition to one another. It is likely that we will have separate word groups, so that they will be in separate word groups. Notice what happens, if we go back to this example here, notice what happens if I get rid of that word group boundary and say, instead of, this is my sister, Janet, and have one word group, this is my sister, Janet. That's now going to be evocative. My sister happens to be called Sally, and I'm talking to Janet and introducing her to my sister. So, this is my sister, Janet. Really does mean something different from this is my sister, Janet. And the final thing I want to talk about here, very quickly, I see Sarah is lurking in the doorway there, is the matter of what we might call comment adverbs. Adverbs which comment on the whole of the message of the rest of the sentence. Okay? Like fortunately. If I say that, fortunately I managed to find my wallet, what it really means is it was fortunate that I managed to find my wallet. Now, if that is the case, when these comment adverbs are initial, we tend to split them off with their own word group. So fortunately, I managed to find my wallet. Consequently, he was completely confused. Reasonably, she didn't want to wait that long. If they're at the end, then I think we have a choice whether to have a word group boundary between them or not. Okay, so those are some general tendencies and some specific uses of tonality in English. Are there any questions for me? Okay, that is the end of the lecture. Thank you.